For more than a century, if you thought about Latin America, you thought about the United States. It was Washington's sphere of influence, so much so that people just called it America's backyard. Well, that's all changing, and it's changing fast. There's a new global power on the scene, and they're not just showing up to trade. They are literally redrawing the map and completely shifting the balance of power.
So, you have to ask the big question, one that matters not just for the Americas, but for the whole world. Is the US actually losing its historic grip on this region? And what in the world does it mean when a new challenger from the East just moves right in?
I mean, just look at the numbers. They tell a really dramatic story. Over the last decade, while US trade with South America actually dropped by a quarter, China's has shot up by more than 40%. This isn't just some small trend, folks. This is a massive tectonic shift in economic gravity.
All right, so let's get into it. To really wrap our heads around what's happening, we're going to look at the history of US dominance, then see how China mounted this incredible challenge. We'll compare the completely different playbooks each superpower is using, what all this means for Latin America, and finally, what's really at stake in this new great game. First things first, we got to turn back the clock. For pretty much the entire 20th century, US influence in Latin America was the only game in town. Washington didn't just have a seat at the table, it owned the table and set the agenda for the whole hemisphere.
And the main tool they used to wield all this power was an economic philosophy called the Washington Consensus. Basically, it was a one-size-fits-all package of free market reforms, selling off state companies, cutting regulations, opening up trade, that countries were, let's say, heavily encouraged to adopt.
And yeah, this was way more than just a friendly suggestion. It was all about the carrot and the stick. The carrot was getting access to these huge, life-saving loans from the IMF and the World Bank. But, and this is a big but, every single dollar came with strings attached. And if you didn't want the carrot, well, then you got the stick. We're talking sanctions, withdrawn aid, and in some really extreme cases, the US backing coups to overthrow your government. But this whole setup, this dynamic that had been in place for decades, was about to be totally blown up. Because while Washington was looking the other way, a new player was quietly, and then very, very loudly, making its move.
At the turn of the millennium, China's economic footprint in Latin America was just tiny. A mere $12 billion in trade for the whole continent. It was barely a blip on the radar, not even a footnote.
But then China joined the WTO in 2001, and everything changed. By last year, that little $12 billion had exploded to over $500 billion. That's a 40-fold increase in just over 2 decades. It's a kind of growth that's almost unheard of in modern history. It's just staggering.
Now, this didn't happen by accident, not at all. China's motivations are crystal clear. They need Latin America's resources, its copper, its lithium, its soybeans, to feed their people and power their industries. This is a massive strategic push to lock down their economic future and to reclaim what they see as their rightful place on the world stage.
So what you have now is this absolutely fascinating contrast. You've got the old guard and the new challenger. And believe me, they are playing 2 completely different games with 2 completely different rulebooks.
I mean, you couldn't find 2 more different approaches. Where the US has always offered loans that came with those really strict political and economic strings attached, China comes in with a different offer. State-backed loans for massive infrastructure projects. We're talking ports, railways, power grids, all with a stated policy of non-interference in what you do at home. It's a fundamental change in how foreign influence even works. It's not so much about military power or political arm twisting anymore. The new currency of power is economic partnership. It's a shift from a world of soldiers and coups to a new one of loans and construction crews. And for the nations of Latin America, this is a total game changer. For the first time in generations, they actually have a real choice. And that presents them with some incredible opportunities and some pretty significant risks. So let's just take Chile, for example. China is now its #1 trade partner, and it's not even close. They buy almost 40% of everything Chile exports, mostly copper. Now that's created a ton of wealth, for sure, but it's also created this deep economic dependency. Think about it. If China's demand ever slows down, the Chilean economy could fall off a cliff.
This new way of thinking is just perfectly captured by Brazil's president, Lula da Silva. What he's saying here shows this powerful new desire for strategic independence. The goal isn't just to swap one boss for another. It's about using this new competition to finally become great on their own terms.
So, you see, for the whole region, this is the ultimate balancing act.
The upside is huge. A new pipeline for investment, a powerful bargaining chip to use with Washington, but the downside is just as big. The very real risk of becoming just a resource hub for China, and even worse, getting caught and crushed in the middle of a superpower rivalry.
Which brings us to our final and honestly, our most critical point. This whole rivalry, it's about so much more than just trade numbers or diplomatic spats. At its very core, this is a fight to secure the raw materials that will define the rest of our century.
We're talking about the literal building blocks of the future. The lithium from South America's Lithium Triangle. That's what's going to power every electric car. The copper from Chile and Peru, you can't have a green energy grid without it. And the soybeans and water, that's about China's fundamental food security. Whoever controls these things controls the future. It's that simple.
So from Washington's point of view, the stakes could not possibly be higher. They don't see this as some friendly competition. They see a strategic rival trying to lock up the supply chains for everything that matters, from green tech to national defense. And they've described it as a potential knife to the throat.
And so that's where we are. Latin America is right at the epicenter of this global power struggle, trying to forge its own path between two giants. So the question is, can these nations play this game smartly and come out on top? Or are we watching them become the first major battlefield in a new, much more complicated kind of Cold War? The answer to that question is going to shape the world for all of us.